하겠습니다. 제3부 회의 사회는 한영석 교수님께서 맡아주시겠습니다. 한영석 교수님께서는 하버드대학교 케네디 스쿨에서 학사학위를, 레드대학원에서 안보정책학 박사학위를 받으시고 현재 국방대학교 부총장으로 재직 중이십니다. 그럼 3부 회의를 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Thank you very much. We will start third panel and final panel. I think this is a very timely seminar. What is a new security order in North Asia and US-Korea-US alliance. I think this is a full autumn season to harvest all the seeds you have sown in spring. So now in Seoul, so many conferences are happening in addition to this one. But this one is, I think, a very important one because in the changing Northeast Asian security order with the rise of China, how Korea or with the United States paved the way for the security and peace of the Korean Peninsula and also in North Asia. So this panel, I think we have three prominent speakers and three discussants. One from the United States, Mark Manning, who is a specialist in Asian affairs at Congressional Research Service. Another Korean scholar who is the expert in Korea-US alliance, Chegang. And he is in IFANS. And another one who is Kim Tae-ho, professor in the Department of International Studies in Hallyu University. And two speakers will talk about Korea-US alliance in the changing security order. And Professor Kim Tae-ho will summarize what has been discussed during the previous two panels, and he will give expert opinion on how this security environment is changing in the wake of the rise in China. So I expect each paper presenter to use 15 minutes, and then we will introduce three commentators later. Dr. Manning, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Han. And thank you again to the East Asia Institute, the organizers, for inviting me here and hosting this very stimulating and timely conference. Because I work for a government institution, although I don't work for the executive branch, I work for the U.S. Congress, so I do have government affiliation. I have to say that my presentation represents my views, not any of the 535 members of Congress or the tens of thousands of staff who work for them. So these are my views alone. I can't blame anyone else. So I was asked to talk about U.S. ROK alliance cooperation, particularly with respect to North Korea, a topic that we haven't addressed that much so far, so this is a good place to do it. And just by way of introduction, of course, we all know, in part because of the extraordinary summit last week in Washington, we've heard very often that U.S.-South Korea relations and the alliance in particular are probably at their best level ever. And for many of us in Washington, for the last year or two, we would observe that South Korea is, in effect, the U.S.'s closest ally in East Asia for the last year or two. And what's cementing that level of good relations, of course, it's not just North Korea, it's global. But it's cemented by coordination over North Korea. And I'm struck by, about a year or two ago, I was talking with a senior policymaker who said that, you know, things are so good on North Korea, we're not just on the same page, we're on the same paragraph. terms of coordination over North Korea. And the strategic patience approach, as the Obama administration officials like to call it, is essentially has become a bilateral approach. It's a joint U.S.-South Korea one. And boiling it down to its essence, and in the paper I sort of talk about different aspects of strategic patience, but the essence of it is essentially that there'll be no return to six-party talks and denuclearization talks without some sort of irreversible steps, or at least a sign that North Korea is willing to take irreversible, tangible steps to denuclearize. And the cooperation is both a symbol, the cooperation over North Korea is both a symbol and also a cause of a really extraordinary level of trust that's been fostered between the two governments. And I'll talk more about this later. But just again, by way of introduction, I think what's interesting about it is that in a way it's because the level of trust is so close, it's enabled the two governments to disagree, sometimes more frankly, between each other. Because they can disagree without creating a sense of crisis between the two governments. Another point about this trust is that what it has enabled us to do, the two governments to do, for 6 decades after the alliance was first created in the 1950s, the two governments created a whole set of institutions to manage the relationship, and often this was done to manage the tensions in the relationship. Very often this was tensions at the very top of the relationship. Some of you were involved in difficult periods, for example, in the 1970s during the Carter administration. Now that the relationship is so good, and again, so good starting from the very top of the two governments, this machinery of the alliance can be put to more positive ends, rather than putting out so many fires and trying to minimize the negative. Now it's focusing on the positive, and I think you see that it's pretty interesting and remarkable to see that not only the two governments that they put together put out the vision statement 2 years ago, but now it's actually starting to be implemented, which does not always happen when a vision statement of very lofty goals is put out between two countries. So that's a very long way of sort of introducing the topic. In terms of my plan, what I'll do is I'll analyze in brief forms, of abbreviated form, a little bit about the strategic patience approach. Then I'll talk about some of the factors that are likely to either continue or diminish U.S.-South Korean unity in the coming months over North Korea. So, strategitic patience. There are 5 features I think that we can identify. You can also look at these as 5 critiques, if you will. And in the paper I go into a little more detail. Right now I'll just tip them off to stimulate some discussion and also to give somehow something to talk about and to criticize. So feature number 1, it's a passive-aggressive posture. And by that, I mean a couple of things. One is that it's more focused on containment rather than rollback. And also that it really is almost a reactive posture. It allows North Korea to control the day-to-day situation. Secondly, and this maybe just is a reflection of thinking in Washington, but in effect, it puts South Korea in the driver's seat. To a remarkable degree, the Obama administration has agreed to, in effect, give South Korea a veto over major initiatives that the U.S. is going to take, and will not go ahead with significant new initiatives without the at least implicit blessing from the Lee government. Number 3 is a question of time. And the approach, strategic patient approach, basically is a medium to long-term one. And the hope is that through increased pressure on Pyongyang, through withholding the economic benefits, and by dangling the prospect of large-scale aid and diplomatic benefits, that eventually this will lead North Korea to change its behavior. And quite explicitly, individuals in both governments acknowledge that in the short term this is unlikely to have an effect, but over the medium term, this will produce results. The critique is that, well, that may be true, but in the meantime, North Korea, of course, has further developed its uranium program, has launched the provocations of last year on the Cheonan and Yangpyeong-do, is presumably accelerating its missile program and perhaps even acquiring the ability to miniaturize its nuclear programs, and has solidified support from China. So I guess, in other words, there's this whole question of time. Whose side is it on? Is time on? If you talk to people in the Lee government, if you talk to people in the Obama administration, they would say, well, it's working, time's on our side. But I think that's very much open to criticism. Fourth, China. Another assumption of the approach is that, again, over time, that China will alter its strategic perception of North Korea and become more willing to either impose or allow more pressure to be put on North Korea. Here again, though, the approach is open to critique about how far China will actually go in pressuring China to fundamentally change. And I think Jay Khan will talk, maybe, I know in your paper you did, but perhaps in your presentation talk more about the China factor as well. I could say more, but I think in the interest of time, I'll hold off on that because undoubtedly there'll be questions. Fifth, domestic politics. And here, as I'll talk about in my conclusion, the two countries might be pulled in slightly different directions. For now, in the U.S., strategic patience has worked quite nicely politically. Engaging North Korea, particularly after the second nuclear test in 2009 and then the provocations of last year, engagement is generally a political loser in the United States and should be attacked, not just from Republicans, but also from many Democrats as well. However, it is true that another provocation from North Korea could cause problems. Right now, people have been very quiet about North Korea, politically, politicians have been, because there's been not much to criticize over the last year as North Korea launches its charm offensive. So North Korea is being relatively quiet. The Obama administration has not done any major new initiatives, so there's not much to criticize. But another provocation from North Korea would lead people, again, from both the left and the right to criticize the strategic basis approach. North Korea is a perfect punching bag for any administration in Washington. Perfect punching bag for opponents of any administration in Washington. South Korea, I think, and I throw this out there, people may feel differently, but strategic patience, I think, is even less politically sustainable. Yes, it's true that South Korean opinion towards North Korea has hardened quite dramatically since Yangpyeong-do a year ago. But I think also that if you look at opinion polls, other opinion pieces, and just my conversations with South Koreans, there's also a desire for more flexibility towards Pyongyang than the Lee government has shown to date. And I think this explains this. Of course, the president is well aware of this, and it explains in part his frequent and I should say quite consistent efforts to keep the door open to inter-Korean dialogue as well. So let me talk about now, move on to some areas where the two governments sort of continue on this vein and talk about areas where the two governments have diverged or appear to have been. How am I doing on time? Okay. So there's been a lot of press reports, particularly here in South Korea over the last, say, 7-8 months, about tensions emerging between the Yi and Obama governments, and particularly that speculation that the Obama administration is putting pressure on Yi government to soften its approach to North Korea. And North Korea has launched its charm offensive for food aid to go back to talks. It's engaged with Russia and China and Kim Jong-il's trips. And there's also been speculation, which is probably accurate, that President Obama wants to minimize the chances of any North Korean provocation during the election next year, and that one way to do this is to at least have some sort of dialogue with North Korea. The most visible area, or public area of disagreement earlier this year was over the question of food aid. And Seoul made it pretty clear, or at least the Obama administration officials have made it clear that Seoul was telling them that they would prefer that the United States not provide large-scale food aid to North Korea. And for a while in the spring and early summer, it looked like the United States would actually go ahead and provide this aid. However, the Obama administration has essentially delayed the decision for over 6 months now, which really, when you delay it that long, it essentially is a decision not to give aid, even though officially they say no. If there's anyone here from the U.S. Embassy that can, I'm sure, will correct me. And one reason for this delay, this ongoing delay and decision not to give aid is in fact because of concerns about how it might upset Seoul. So I think that at least so far, that disagreement really has been quite minimized. Now it's possible that we'll see a similar disagreement or tensions emerging over the negotiations that the Obama administration is undergoing with North Korea over the search for prisoner of war and missing in action, or POW MIA remains from the Korean War. But so far we don't see any signs of that. Second area that's potentially more significant of tensions is over South Korea's new active deterrence or proactive deterrence military posture of responding more assertively, more robustly to any future North Korean provocation. This has introduced a new element of risk in the alliance, and I think any number of indicators show that if there's a future provocation that's unambiguously from North Korea, that South Korea will be much more eager, I think, to launch a harsher response than the United States would. So that could create significant tensions. Again, in my paper, I go into more detail on this, but in the interest of time, I'll just leave it at that for discussion. Thirdly, the nuclear talks, issues of high politics, nuclear talks, a peace regime, etc. Here again, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of speculation in the press, and some of it may be accurate, that the Obama administration is putting pressure on the government to soften its North Korea stance. But in looking at this closely, I can't find that much. Well, certainly behind the scenes, there may be these debates, discussions, pressure, if you will. But if you look at outcomes, you don't see it so far in terms of any disagreement between the two. And in fact, just about every move that Seoul has made and Washington has made has been quite carefully choreographed between the two. So to me, even if there is some debate and discussion or disagreements, the two sides seem to be managing it quite well in terms of how the public face that they show. And so it indicates to me once again how close the bilateral cooperation has been. And the takeaway that I have from this is that while the tone of the approach may be changing, the actual substance of it, in other words, that yes, we're willing to be more flexible in terms of negotiating and opening up some diplomatic channel with North Korea, but our demands are still the same. Strategic patience still applies. So overall, it seems like alliance cooperation so far is being tested only at the edges, only at the margins, but not fundamentally. coordination over nuclear issues and peace regime, etc., seems to be as tight as ever, even if they are becoming more dynamic behind closed doors. Yes, there have been disagreements over food aid, but they really haven't escalated beyond sort of the food aid issue. And of course, tensions over how to respond to a North Korean attack, fortunately, have been hypothetical so far. Okay, so in conclusion, let's look ahead to the future. When things are as good as they can get, there's only one way to go. So all good things must come to an end, and that goes for even U.S.-South Korea alliance cooperation. Most people think that the next government in South Korea, there's no way that it can be as cooperative, just by definition, with the next U.S. administration, whether it's President Obama or whoever occupies the White House. But even before then, I think next year we're likely to see more signs of disagreement between the two allies. North Korean events are going to become even more uncertain than usual. We potentially have leadership change in maybe all 6 of the 6-party talks. And during times of transition like this, it generally doesn't lead to boldness in foreign policy. However, there are 2 countries that might be the exception to that. One is North Korea. But there, of course, it's a completely black box. We have no way of predicting, let alone knowing what's going on at the leadership level. It certainly is possible that we have some sort of leadership change that could lead to foreign policy boldness, although I and I think most people would doubt it under Kim Jong-un, whatever sort of, however you would characterize his regime, if indeed that comes about. But the other more likely place where you could get change is here in South Korea. And again, I go back to what I said before. What I sense is a growing sense of disquiet, almost dissatisfaction with Yi's approach towards Pyongyang. To me, one thing that I often point out when I get asked this by members of Congress and their staff is I point to Park Geun-hye's Foreign Affairs article in the U.S. publication Foreign Affairs, where she quite explicitly criticizes the strategic patience approach as not having any ability to influence Pyongyang's behavior in any meaningful way. So far we haven't seen any really alternatives being, I should say, any significant alternatives being proposed to either strategic patience or to sunshine policy. I'm sure there'll be some middle road that will emerge. However, if there are no North Korean provocations next year, I think we're likely to see much more of an appetite for trust-building outreaches to North Korea from Seoul than you will from Washington. And in part that may be driven by Lee Myung-bak's desire to build a legacy. If he does not have a summit, for example, he'll be the first South Korean president in quite some time not to have one. And if you see this more fundamental shift that we've seen to date emerge, then it could lead to some heightened tensions between the two allies over the next year. So when I stop there, I think I've got all the time over there.
Next, Professor Chang will talk about strategic alliance instead of strategic patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. It is my great honor to be invited to such a conference on security alliance between the United States and South Korea. As Dr. Manning already mentioned, I will speak for myself, not presenting any ideas and views of government I work for. It's quite difficult to make a presentation after hearing General Thurman's statement speech during the lunch. According to his speech, I think everything's so fine between the United States and South Korea. We are ready to tackle peninsula level, regional level, as well as global level issues together. That's quite optimistic. That's, I think, quite wish actually there's a wholehearted wish for the future of our ROK-U.S. security alliance. In my paper, I have identified 5 factors which might interfere the realization of what nowadays we have to add another adjective, multi-dimensional strategic alliance between the United States and South Korea. Maintaining that kinds of alliance requires lots of efforts and resources. Otherwise, this kind of verbal statement could not guarantee the robustness of alliance relations between those two countries. As onset, so actually both sides should work hard together to maintain, strengthen the fundamentals of alliance while they are talking about some rather long-term perspective and long-term objectives. If we are able to realize what they call strategic or multidimensional alliance, we will be in a better position to realize not just the interests of those countries, but the common values which could be shared not only between the U.S. and our country, but also the other members of the international community. And also there could be an area for cooperation between the United States and South Korea, much be widened. For example, I've already mentioned climate change or the environment issue, the human security, all what is the human security, transnational human security issues. So if that's the case, I think I can say, we are very much in a good position and we can do many things together. Now we are strategically aligned with each other. It's kind of permanent marriage. So, unfortunately, there are 5 factors I have illustrated. First, ever-changing North Korean challenges. We used to focus on North Korean nuclear challenges, but actually last year, 2 years later, Yeonpyeong-do and Cheonan made us to revisit the nature of evolutionary character of North Korean challenges. It seems to me that North Korea has developed strategies and capability to use its own conventional forces to achieve political as well as military objectives in an unconventional way. I think they will continue to do so. But we have forgotten the reality. Seoul capital area is only 40 miles away from the DMZ. And there's to my memory, I think there are about 600 provocations since the end of the Korean War. So North Korea will continue to use its military forces. That's the character or basic fundamental character of North Korean regime. There could be various reasons for North Korea to use its forces. Maybe demonstration of forces in some cases, or sometimes they alternate their policy to charm offense. But in their nature, in their vein, I think there's provocation is there. That is first one. Second aspect, nuclear challenge is more severe. Now North Korea has 2 nuclear programs. One is plutonium, the other uranium program. The uranium program is much more serious than the plutonium. They have about 14,000 nuclear fuel which could be used for the production of plutonium. But actually uranium, we have no idea the state of the uranium program. If they believe they can extract a sufficient amount of uranium and manufacture uranium-based nuclear explosion devices, actually the situation of the Korean Peninsula is quite different from what we used to know. So I think that we are actually in an even worse position than we were in the past 5 or 10 years ago. There's a seriousness really with us. It is not possible to resolve this North Korean nuclear issue as well as ever-evolving North Korean conventional strategy. So that's the one fact which might actually ask the United States and South Korea to revisit the nature and the fundamental nature of North Korea, as well as the threat assessment of North Korea. I don't know whether both countries have done thorough examination of North Korean threat assessment up to now. I don't think so. After the Cheonan Institute government introduced the Defense Reform Committee, but actually they went through just briefly about the threat assessment. They just got into this defense reform plan, and they have presented their own version of defense reform. They call it Defense Reform 307. It's related to restructuring of ROK, the armed forces, and acquiring more weapon systems. I think that defense reform is highly affected by the Chang'an and Yongpyong incident. So it is more short-term oriented force procurement program rather than long-term oriented. Either if that plan is realized, I don't think South Korea will be able to acquire sufficient assets to realize or make a huge contribution to the international community, or will be able to send our troops overseas to be part of coalition forces in carrying out non-combatant missions overseas. So actually that is the area. Second area actually is the question about the U.S. commitment to the defense of South Korea. Whether the United States is capable or is willing to use its forces in the defense of South Korea. Of course, I'm quite confident about it, but actually credibility is more psychological than the physical one. So over the years, actually, for example, I don't know, I made a comment whether the United States is capable to provide a sufficient level of augmentation force in time and place. Actually, for example, the former Secretary Gates mentioned it's not possible for the United States to mobilize that level of forces in support of South Korean defense. So actually, the U.S. commitment to the defense of South Korea will be challenged by the evolutionary character of North Korea and the South Korea's inability to build up its own forces until 2014. That's the second aspect. Third aspect is economic difficulties we will be having into the future. Actually, when we introduced defense in 2020, basic assumption that actually the national economic growth rate is about more than 6%. And now that we're experiencing about 4%, next year will be less than 4%. It's not possible to secure enough financial resources to realize the plan we have produced already. So I was involved in midterm budget planning board. Actually, I have a very difficult time with the people in the Ministry of Finance and Strategy. They are very reluctant to give more, actually. It's kind of, the rule applies to every agency. They cannot make an exception at all. So I don't know whether it's possible to secure additional financial resources to boost up or to build more reliable defense forces of South Korea. This morning, actually I mentioned about the U.S. assumed that South Korea will be able to carry out the main responsibility of defending itself. But actually, if there is a financial constraint upon South Korea, I don't know whether it's possible for South Korea to acquire that level of force. There's one, hardware. Second is software part. Third one is a human part. I think human part is much more difficult to acquire in less than 4 years. This is 2011, so we have less than 4 years until we have the option back in our hands. I don't think it's possible to acquire the skills and knowledge of running the system to effectively defend ourselves against those first provocation. So, but I have illustrated how we should approach this North Korean threat in detail in my paper. Actually, the third aspect, the plan to return the wartime operation control by 2015 actually has been already delayed. We have been delayed already. Actually, initially it was 2007, then 2012, then 2015. So continuous delay. Both sides agree on the master plan. The problem comes down to who is going to pay how much. It's more detailed. So we have not been able to iron out the differences on the more details. So actually they will continue to further delay of implementation of the agreement we made with the United States. So I don't know whether, and the other one is like, I don't know, still, maybe it's classified, because I don't know what would be the command structure between the United States and South Korea. So there's a difference between the U.S. and ours on this issue. And in addition to that, there are other differences still going on. I don't know whether it's possible to iron out and overcome those differences and fasten up the process. But anyway, I'm a little bit skeptical about that we will be able to complete the plan or hasten the process because of this. I have already mentioned about economic constraints. The other aspect, like now, as Mark already mentioned, China got an inward dependency, actually, rather than outward looking, always having a good relation with China. For example, the incident side effect of China and also Vietnam. Nowadays they are much more preoccupied with more immediate stuff, not actually the regional or global concern. So why we should pay more attention being faced with under the threat of more clear and present threat of North Korea. So people actually have a tendency to look at the mere peninsula-wise level, not rather the regional or global level. There's a disconnect between these two sides. China factor is the one maybe, I don't know whether it's possible to have a positive Chinese response on the strengthening of ROK-US alliance, because they have been very reluctant to see the kinds of naval joint and naval exercise between combined exercise between the US and ROK on the West Sea and other things. So they like to see less presence of US forces on the Korean Peninsula as well as the periphery areas. So on the other hand, South Korea is actually inevitably forced to have actually wants to have a better, good working relations with China. I don't know how we can overcome this China factor in our force planning or defense planning. Having said that, I think I suggested some detailed approach about it. In this sense, I think we should spend more, and also we're eager to spend more. It's consolidated the basis. I don't know how much you can say, but actually, in order to build trust and confidence in each other, I think that each side should do its best to ensure the other side is commitment about the realization of the interests of those countries. But actually, to save money is the way we have to proceed in realizing the strategic alliance. So I don't know, there could be various ways to minimize the side effect and reduce the cost of transforming the alliance into a strategic alliance. But basically, we have to spend what we are supposed to spend. Thank you.
Kim Tae-ho will talk about the implication of war in China and new security order, and especially China's increasing military capabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I am Tae-ho Kim from Hallyu University of Graduate Studies, and it's my honor and pleasure to speak at this important conference. My topic is about China's growing military capability and the ROK-US alliance. As the thrust of this session is about the major aspects of the evolving alliance as capably gone by Mark Manning on the North Korea factor and by Kang Choi on the alliance management. I think my focus on the China factor will fit well into the whole session. And I'm aware that this is the last paper today, so my presentation will be short, pointed, and straightforward. Probably the simplest way to conceptualize the state of affairs in PLA modernization is this: half full or half empty glass, depending upon your perspective, or depending upon what you want to see about it. It could be filled or still empty. There is no doubt that the Chinese military for the last 25 years has gradually but significantly improved its fighting capability through across-the-board defense modernization. They have made important gains and achievements in equipment, technology, doctrine, strategy, defense industry, education, and training. That's true. And they now employ top-of-the-line fighters. On the other hand, they have still glaring deficiencies. Let me throw out some examples, such as J-6 and J-7, which are Chinese version of a MiG-19 and MiG-21. MiG-19 was formally, officially deployed in Soviet Air Force in 1954, and MiG-21 about 1957 or 58. That means they are in their 50s. meaning that many of the Chinese military, Chinese Air Force fighter pilots are flying the plane that is older than they are. So it's not very safe, on this. So, and also they have many deficiencies in fighting modern warfare, such as anti-submarine warfare, air defense, replacement at sea, and let alone the sea-based the Air Force as well. So this is the point that I will make as a starter. I have made several arguments, and let me telegraph some of them. And the first two major arguments that I have made here is this. One is the anti-access strategy of the PLA. Anti-access strategy is originally developed in the Taiwan contingency. It aims to deter, delay, and if possible, defeat the approaching U.S. air and naval assets. And it has something to do with not only in the Taiwan Strait, but also separately dispute in the South China Sea and the Korean contingency, such as North Korean contingency, as it tries to deter or delay the arrival of U.S. forces in such contingencies. So my point is that this anti-access strategy is applicable to all other major contingencies in this region, which is an important factor, I believe. The second argument that I have made is the growing importance of the Russian factor in China's force modernization. China has, for the past 20 years, imported Russian weapon systems and military technologies, among others. And this has enabled China to develop the so-called indigenous weapon systems, improve its defense industrial capability, and by extension, anti-access capabilities. Let me throw out some examples one more time. China has developed and deployed various kinds and types of classes of weapons, major weapon systems. In the case of conventional submarines, from old Whiskey, Gold, Romeo, Ming, Sun, and now Yuan. But it is the Russian kilo-class submarine that is the most quiet and is capable as well. In the case of missile destroyers, they also have many kinds as well, from the old Lü Da, Lü Hu, Lü Hai, Lü Yang, and Lü Zhao. But it is still Russian submarine destroyer that is most capable and forceful as well. So these Russian weapons will be assigned to the highest mission critical areas when they are needed. In this paper, I will skip over some of the detailed weapon systems and technologies. Let me again point out that it is very important not to overestimate or underestimate the PLA's actual military capability. This is easier to be said than done because it is very complicated. Most of what we read in Korea from the major newspapers is about the top of the line equipment, never about the old ones. And actually, PLA consists of three pillars. One is weapons technology, doctrine and operation, and education and training. You will never hear or see in the newspaper from broadcast the last two, only about this aspect. But as I will see later, China employs both old and new weapon systems, military technologies. All armed forces have both systems, even the United States as well. But the point I'm making, the gap is much wider and greater in the case of the PLA due to some factors like a dramatic change of its domestic and external environments for the past 60 years or even past 107 years since 1840 as well. And some other points that I have made in this paper are as follows. One is that the sources of high technologies. In the case of Chinese naval vessels, China has a very wide array of foreign technological sources. It's more than 15 in total. That usually creates enormous problems in combat system integration and interoperability. And this should be factored into assessing China's actual fighting capabilities as well. And one of the pitfalls that we usually find ourselves is the fact that there is a little value in asking when the PLA will catch up the US forces, or numerical bean counting, or the order of battle, force-on-force comparisons. It only gives you snapshots, never the flow or the trends of the situation. So, in this region, East Asia, there is an asymmetry of military capability between China and its weaker neighbors. PLA Navy is quite weak, and it does have glaring weaknesses, but many of its neighbors are much weaker as well. For instance, in the South China Sea, there are 10 Asian member states, but not only they are divided within, but their level of military preparedness is quite low, and they have to make an adequate military doctrines. They have to make resolute political decisions, and on top of a low funding situation as well. So it is only the presence of the U.S. forces in that area, and also limits of the PLA to project and sustain power in that long distance in that body of water, that has largely prevented any militarized conflict from occurring so far. And finally, some have argued that Chinese external behavior have become assertive for the past 3 years in the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea as well. But it is wiser to remind that China has been almost always assertive and aggressive when it comes to what China defines as sovereignty and the territorial issues. The newest term is the so-called core interest, 核心利益. And so it should be reminded one more time that China does need stable and peaceful external environment for the sake of its own domestic economic development. So China has emphasized regional stability and self-claimed that it is a responsible great power. But at the same time, it has also behaved. Its realpolitik behavior based upon hard-nosed national interest is quite another thing. Both trends we can find, so this is something we need. So what does all these trends mean for the Korean security and the ROK-US alliance? I have noted at the end of this paper, I can go over this, is that the following. One is, we need to understand geostrategic and historical considerations from the point of Chinese leaders and the strategists. Number two, we should be aware of the exact nature of Sino-South Korean relationship for the past 19 years. I have noted 4 or 5 major trends in the paper. And also, China's force deployment near Korean Peninsula. Not only there are 3 group armies in the northeast provinces, but also in the West Sea, the Chinese, all of the operational Chinese attack submarines and SSBNs are deployed in the Qingdao areas. About Bariat is also the Ruisun, Dalian areas as well. So this is something that we should keep in mind. And I mentioned about the limited defense sufficiency, which is principle and strategy, which means that we need the capability to deter external provocations from occurring, or if the deterrence fails, need to raise the cost of attacking to an or level unacceptable to its potential rivals. And I have noted two more points. One is that by any standard, South Korea is a middle power, except but it is also at the same time is a superpower in the case of women's sports, like LPGA, figure skating, or weightlifting, you may recall. So we need a country that has no territorial ambitions, and also which has a will and capability to assist us in time of crisis. And also, we need a country that has proven to be empirically and historically proven to be a benign power. That the only country in this world that meets these three conditions is the United States. So China will never be a substitute for the United States for the defense of South Korea. And I have a few other points, but the time's up, so let me stop here. Thank you.
Now is a discussion session. I will introduce Professor Sung of Seoul National University, and then two Chinese sitting together from mainland China and Taiwan. Is it okay for you to sit together? Maybe it is reflecting EAI's intentional or unintentional design to have two together anyway. Now starting from Professor Sung.
Thank you. 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chairman. I really enjoyed reading Dr. Manny's paper on this, and I also agree basically that one of the key, or maybe the most important reason why the alliance, the ROK-US alliance is so good today is the North Korea issue. And I remember back in the previous administration, despite the fact that actually the two countries resolved many difficult issues on the alliance, such as relocation of base and time operational control and all that. But the trouble always was the kind of difference in their North Korea policy. And so you summed it up and as a kind of agreement on, it's not on the same pages, on the same paragraph or word on this so-called policy of strategic patience. And it seems to me, basically, yes, not only these two countries, especially at the top leadership level, they do have a quite eye-to-eye, same common understanding about this issue, but also even the fact that it's actually almost President Obama, despite some of his own advisors' opinion, tried to have South Korea lead the way in quite a key moment. That was a quite remarkable event that is quite contrast to what was the case just in the previous administration. Having said that, I do have a couple of questions for your paper. One is about this strategic patience going back to, and when you say the basic assumption or nature of this strategic patience, the first item is passive aggressive posture, which in itself is a quite interesting concept, whether it's your own making. Anyway,
My
that...
wife uses it all the time on these.
Okay, now I get a clear picture of that. And but in defining this passive aggressive, you said that basically this is effectively is a policy of containing North Korea's proliferation activity rather than rolling back its nuclear program. And it's kind of a little bit interesting because I understand that this might be really the kind of practical position taken by the Obama administration. But so far, as far as I know, I mean, the official statement or rhetoric from the Blue House, Lee Myung-bak government is quite open. But the reason why the inter-Korean relations are so bad at this moment is that from the very beginning, the President Lee took very principled approach when it comes to North Korea's nuclear issues, meaning that it's not just containing North Korea's de facto nuclear capacity, rather they really, it seems to me, try to persuade or roll back North Korea's nuclear program. And that has been the kind of one of the main reasons why the inter-Korean relations could not go further, despite actually, yes, as you correctly mentioned in the latter part, actually, the Myung-bak government also at the same time tried to make some kind of progress with North Korea, such as like a secret meeting for possible summit. So, in that sense, there could be a quite different approach or clash between the two governments when it comes to strategic patience. But then still, as you said, rightly so far there has been no major difference or clash between these two on this North Korea's nuclear issue. So why do you think that was the case? In a way you said, because they are on the same page in such a fundamental issue, they can disagree. I mean, this is, in principle, is a quite significant difference, if you will. I mean, when you say containing North Korean nuclear activities, almost like, to me, it sounds like tacitly acknowledging de facto North Korea's nuclear capacity. So in that case, obviously, at least officially, Lee Myung-bak government has a different opinion. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit why still they could work on this issue in such a manner. Second is that again, this in the future, in the coming years, then yet at the same time, you also summarize the criticism on this strategic patience approach taken by Obama, in the sense that issue of this, time is on both sides, and North Korea actually developing. They're not just sit there waiting for Americans to make a move. They are actively pursuing one nuclear program. So in those things, how do you think sustainable this strategic patience if, for example, President Obama re-elected in the next year? Can they go on like this in the coming years? If that was the kind of necessary choice, given the fact that everybody knows that North Korea is not going to give up no matter what we offer. But that is one thing. They are also fully developing their capacity. So there could be increasing criticism of this strategic patience. So how sustainable this strategic patience approach, not only in terms of American U.S. administration, but even this collaboration with South Korea. My other question is regarding, you also talked about some possible tension or challenge for the alliance in the coming years. One is that about possibly next or beyond regarding this possible another military provocation by the North Korea. In that case, the South Korea's proactive deterrence policy can create certain challenge or tension with the U.S. security interest in the region. And at the very last paragraph, you talked about more concrete, specifically two possible periods of difficulty, which is where if North Korea escalates hostility following a South Korean counterattack. Can you elaborate on what scenario you can envision there is a serious challenge or tension between the two? And maybe more interesting enough, in the second scenario is that in the first few months of 2013, when the alliance will be adjusting to working with the new South Korean president. Of course, we have no idea who will become the new South Korean president next by the trouble in that case. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Han, Vice President Han, for your kind of humor. I like your humor. Actually, you are very humorous. Professor Wang and I myself will be, having a lot of chances meeting here in Seoul or in Taipei or even in Beijing. So we're going to get along, with each other very fine. Thank you. And we're not going to fight. Okay. Okay. Well, go back to the.
We are intermediary.
Well, thank you very much. Please go back to the Professor Chui's nicely made paper. I'm very much impressed by his paper. I think this is very enlightening and also very interesting and also very constructive in giving us a kind of a future on the ROK-US alliance. And particularly, I think there are many reasons that could push Professor Chui to be this devoted and also ambitious to propose a kind of a rather simply kind of military alliance into a very kind of detailed or decent kind of alliance based on closer strategic cooperation. And also, I appreciated his ideas to introduce this kind of idea. For example, bringing us the three levels that we can see from the ROK-US cooperation in the future. For example, he mentioned the common values, trust, and also peace building will be the three major kind of pillars or three major kind of components to foster this kind of alliance, so that not only United States and South Korea, but also other part of the areas or part of the countries could benefit from such a kind of closer cooperation. I'm the commentator, so I really have to find some kind of questions that are directed to Professor Chui to be answered. For example, my first question or first interest will be this. Professor Chui has very, very much distinguished the far side in this paper. So he reminds us on December the 1st, 2015, the wartime operational control is transferred from Commander of Combined Forces Command to the Chairman of Joint Chief of Staffs of the ROK. So in other words, there's still 4 years left, from the moment here to the late 2015. So is this the kind of a settled timetable for us to think about, or for us to envision a kind of basic idea about what you're talking on the strategic alliance? If this will be the timetable, do we find some kind of echo from the American side? And in other words, could we find some other American scholars would have the same ideas, so that we can cooperate to accomplish this kind of new style of alliance? This is the first question, and very, very important for us to think further about this kind of issue. And you also mentioned that there's some kind of impediments or some kind of obstacles that we can find for this closer strategic alliance between U.S. and ROK. I think, of course, the North Korean nuclear program may not be able to be dealt with by this kind of closer airline, a kind of a closer strategic alliance, because it seems to us that North Korea, wouldn't listen or obey any kind of international law or international regulations, no matter how close the United States could cooperate with the Republic of Korea. So in addition to the nuclear program developments by the North Korea, for example, I would think about something else. For example, starvation, or malnutrition, or leader succession, or limited warfare, or even the possible collapse of the North Korean regime, or, for example, subversion against South Korea, or terrorist attack waged by the North Korean regime. Well, can we do that? Well, can we do that, or can we deal with these kind of contingencies, by the closer U.S. ROK alliance? Even this kind of alliance would be envisioned as kind of a very close kind of alliance. That may be a little different from right now. My other question will be this, if I can finish very quickly. What will be the impact upon the ROK-U.S. relations, or military relations, or kind of a further strategic relations, from the kind of China or Russia's kind of position? Well, do they agree with you, or do they have any kind of a possible reaction on this? And finally, my question will be this: do you see any kind of impacts about American kind of cut in the American military budget in the future? And if American will cut its own kind of a military budget, do you think that the strategic alliance in the future will be that feasible that you mentioned in your paper? Thank you very much, and I would like to listen to your response. Thank you.
That's one.
Thank you, Professor Carl. First, I also would like to thank you for your help, further improving our cross-strait relations. I really appreciate that. And I think it's always quite challenging for a young scholar like myself to comment on papers by established scholars like Professor Taylor King. But nevertheless, I will try. First of all, I think I would say I really enjoyed reading this very powerful paper. A lot of very authoritative account of China's growth in its military strength. So I've learned a great deal from that. In terms of my comments and questions, I think I may have 5 points, and hopefully I can finish in 7 minutes. Firstly, I think when comes in hand with capability is another very important variable, which is intention. And I think this is seems to me is sort of one thing not mentioned very much in this paper is China's intention. But partly maybe because of China's intention is regarded as very much uncertain. So I think this actually goes back to what has been beginning, I think, the discussion starting from last night's dinner and also throughout today's presentation on and off. That's his question about hedging. So I think Michael O'Halloran is on the plane right now. So it's okay for me to quote him. I think he's among the scholars who came up and argued that, well, actually, China's neighbors, including United States, are not hedging against China. It might be a matter of definition or a matter of degree, but I think this is very interesting for me to read in Professor King's paper. Actually, I think he mentioned that there is rationale why South Korea wants to hedge against the uncertainties associated with, especially about China's intention. So I really would like to hear more, like Professor King can elaborate a little bit more on this, particularly with regard to intentions, or put it another way, and the threat perception. How does that affect, in your view, the Korean and then maybe other regional players, their calculation in terms of hedging against China? Secondly, Professor Kim also mentioned in his paper that the PLA's anti-access strategy actually is not only is confined in the Taiwan Strait crisis scenario, it actually also equally applicable to beyond the Taiwan and to other regional contingencies. I think I do have some question in this regard. So I think even if we, for instance, in a purely hypothetical scenario, even if there is a military conflict in South China Sea between China and some other playing countries, I think it's likely to be a very small scale skirmishes. If that is the case, and I think the United States, U.S. military probably will be, the likelihood that United States military will get involved will be low. So if that is the case, then I'm wondering how that the anti-access capability on the Chinese part will be relevant to our analysis here. And also, Professor Kim also mentioned in his presentation that two factors. One is the presence of U.S. military in the region. And secondly, the incapability on the Chinese part, Chinese military, in projecting its force to, say, to South China Sea and other regions, which give rise to help contribute to the stability and peace in this region. But I think maybe also we should also take into account the fact that there are actually very strong desire on, I think, virtually all sides, including China, Vietnam, Philippines, to avoid serious military conflict, or at least to avoid the escalation of their disputes sort of out of control and getting into real conflict. And there are many reasons, of course, the military incapability Professor Kim mentioned on the Chinese part, and also I think there is a domestic sort of concern about domestic instability. This is kind of evident on both Beijing and Hanoi's case. And also there is maybe the sense of vulnerability on the part of Vietnam and Philippines. Therefore, I think, so what I'm trying to say is that beyond in addition to what the two factors Professor Kim mentioned, there may be other reasons which will really contribute to the strong desire on virtually all sides of the disputes to try to avoid real military conflict. Number three, and also I think my own very sort of preliminary understanding of anti-access capability is that it is essentially a kind of a deterrence capability. So it is defensive in nature, and acquiring anti-access capability does not mean that China will acquire. It's not equal to that China will gain the offensive capability, launching attacks against Taiwan, for instance. So moreover, I think most of the observers of cross-strait relations probably would agree that barring some extremely highly unlikely development scenarios such as Taiwan moving toward digital independence, then I think the likelihood of real military conflict over Taiwan, across the Taiwan Strait, I think it has become increasingly low. And I think some conservative writers in the United States and elsewhere worry that with the increase in China's military capability and the shift in military balance across Taiwan Strait in favor of Beijing, with that happening, and the Chinese mainland might be tempted to launch attacks against Taiwan. Honestly, personally, I think I'm not very convinced by that kind of argument. It seems to me the problem here is that that kind of argument is actually attributing too much of intention or actual plating intentions out of capability. This is a question I just mentioned in the beginning. So I think if we can borrow from some game theory jargon, forgive me doing this, but I think the kind of possibility of military conflict cross over Taiwan Strait, I think also maybe it is also off the equilibrium path, so to speak. My fourth point, I think maybe also a bit missing in what in Professor King's analysis, at least seems to me, is what I would be very curious about what Professor King, your advice would be, what China actually should and could do. How China can reassure South Korea and other regional players that its intentions are actually a status quo oriented, not rather than a revisionist. And maybe enhancing transparency is one thing that PLA should and could do, but I would be very much eager to hear more insights from Professor King. And lastly, I think in connection to that, I think if the enhanced alliance ties between South Korea and the United States is called upon, is very much needed, then it seems to me that there's would also be the need to for South Korea to balance that a little bit with more active, proactive security, strategic security, and dialogues, or maybe even security cooperations with China. So it could take the form of dialogues, exchanges, consultations, or even, I think previously, China and South Korea have done the joint rescue and research exercise. So I would very much eager to hear, what kind of advice you would provide to China. Thank you very much.
Before giving the floor to paper presenters, I will collect several questions from floor. Maybe you will sit all day long there. You have a lingering question before you go into home. So I collect 3 questions. Okay.
First of all, thank you for uncommonly good presentations and discussion. My question goes to Professor Kang Choi. And in order to transform the current ROK-U.S. alliance to be strategic alliance, I believe it is essential or somewhat imperative for ROK forces to be transformed first prior to attempting to pursue that direction. And of course, as you briefly mentioned during the presentation, the Ministry of National Defense in Korea is trying to modify the upper tier of command and control. But I think it is more like restructure of command and control, a little far from transformation of command and control. Then, having said that, my question is, do you have any suggestions or thoughts on that particular issue? Thank you.
I enjoyed the excellent panel, and also I expect Mr. Chairman to wrap up the central theme of today's seminar. And my question directed to Mark on North Korea denuclearization through 6-party talks. I'd like to know your opinion, not somebody else. So I'm sure you can answer this question. In Washington, there are a lot of opinions on utilities of the 6-party talks to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. My question is, do you think that North Korea denuclearization through the sixth party is dying or still alive, and it depends upon who asks who is dying and so on. That sixth party talks is no longer useful and so on. I heard many times, but I'd like to listen to your opinion. And the second question is Park Geun-hye foreign policy article. Seems to me you mentioned briefly that Park Geun-hye is of course the next presidential candidate and strong. Maybe may be elected next year. Then South Korea's the North Korean policies will be completely changed. So although the foreign policy article has not presented specifics of the two concepts, the trust politics and alignment and so on, I think that nobody mentioned alignment politics. Park Geun-hye mentioned today very important topic, and so my question is in Washington, how from the Washington D.C., how the Washington circle view the Park Geun-hye view, evaluate Park Geun-hye the concept, the two concepts, and move to the Professor Chair. Over luncheon, actually, embassy people ask me if peace treaty concluded, then U.S. troops still remain, or what about the ROK-U.S. alliance system? So I said, I made the comment that North Korea argued that peace treaty requires U.S. troop withdrawal as well as abolition of the ROK-U.S. alliance system. So that's why we should be very careful about peace regime building, concluding peace treaty between, of course, North Korea wants North Korea and the United States. We have to avoid it. We have to conclude the multilateral peace treaty instead of bilateral. So, Professor Che, you are expert on this issue, peace regime building. What do you think about their comment? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask a question to direct to Dr. Manning. I feel a bit embarrassed with the term strategic patience. Is it a proper term? Is it fit, or is it just muddling through, or kind of excuse doing that much? And second question goes to the Dr. Wang, Professor Wang. Don't you think Chinese policy toward North Korea is also kind of strategy, patience? Thank you.
Okay. Within 4 minutes?
4 minutes. I'll do my best. Thank you. Great questions. Thank you for those thoughtful remarks. Glad to see someone read my paper closer than I maybe did. So real quickly, proactive deterrence was the one comment. Why would possible tensions be peaked during the first months of a new administration on both sides? I think there it's because, it's the level of trust and confidence that the two administrations now have in each other that they have now is unlikely to be duplicated particularly if it'll change, just by definition, because you'll have new personalities, new approaches, etc. So that's a time of heightened vulnerability, and so if there's any concern about how do we get off that escalatory ladder, it's going to be harder to manage it if you're dealing with a transition during a time of political transition. Are the two approaches why hasn't there been a clash between the two sides? I don't see them I see them as being perfectly compatible, not incompatible, like you're presenting. I think, of course, the Obama officially, the goal is the same as the Lee goal, which is rollback. But the approach is to be very passive. Set up these principles, and then sit back and wait. Set up the principles, set up the conditions, the external environment, and then sit back and wait. Is basically the tactical approach. The other thing I would say is that the approach is very ambiguous. It allows, it's a dual track, right? So sometimes you can be hard, sometimes you can be soft. So it allows for a lot of strategic ambiguity. It's not just applicable to the China, Taiwan situation, but also for dealing with North Korea. How sustainable is strategic patience? I think that's the core of this. I think you're exactly right. It is. I think there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical that it is sustainable for a whole number of reasons. I already outlined domestically why in the two countries, but also if North Korea does make advancements, then I think that and this goes to the question about muddling through or not. I mean, and I think you hinted at this too, Samuel, is that this is particularly in Washington, this is a very practical approach. Again, as I said, there's no winners politically to being aggressive with North Korea either way, either engagement or hawkish. So this is sort of a very practical muddling through approach. And that works as long as North Korea is not doing anything that's directly threatening to the U.S. However, I think we may be approaching a danger zone where North Korea forces itself to a higher priority than, say, the Iranian program. And the key there is the long-range missiles. Let's see, the six-party talks, dying or still alive. We could debate that forever, and perhaps we will over dinner. I will say that, and so obviously I'm not going to answer directly your question, Dr. Clark, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there are people in Washington who say there is no more utility for these. There are people who say, no, we should keep going, and that there is utility even if we agree that they are unlikely to succeed in the goal of full denuclearization. There is utility in keeping them alive as a process, again, to try and neutralize North Korea. So it's more of a containment than a rollback strategy. And personally, honestly, it depends on what day it is. Some days I wake up and I say, no, we should just forget about it. Other days I say, well, there is some value in this. So I sort of go back. I'm confused. Go back and forth. And very quickly, how people in DC view Park Geun-hye's concepts. I don't think people pay that much attention to it. Korea watchers certainly have noted it and have long been warning people, particularly conservatives, to say, just because she's Park Geun-hye, do not assume that she's going to have necessarily a hawkish approach towards North Korea. And she's shown that repeatedly. She's been very consistent on that over the last 10 years, I think. So that's a half-baked answer to that, but we can maybe continue this more.
Okay. Actually, based upon my experience in the four-party talk, I fully agree with actually the peace regime. Those that demand the withdrawal of USFK and the conclusion of peace treaty as a kind of precondition. So they ask the signing of peace treaty actually the starting point, and then they ask the implementation of the agreement we made in the peace treaty. And in reverse, this is more cautious approach is very necessary. Okay, we have to consolidate the conditions and basis for peace, not a simple paper. That the peace treaty should come later after we can consolidate the basic, especially the tension reduction and substantial and tension reduction. Because actually, if we once sign that kind of history, that actually undermines the resistance of United Nations Command on the Korean Peninsula. The UN system has two functions: it's maintaining this armistice arrangement. Second function, the force provider, real area force provider. It's quite necessary for us to have the UNC in the midst, in the pursuit of peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. So we should be very careful about that. About the US-FK issue, actually, this, I remember, actually, still we maintain the position that US-FK will remain even after the unification. It's actually in our, based upon our mutual defense treaty between the United States, we will remain there in the alliance. In our mutual defense treaty, there is no word, clause or word specified most of it as an external aggressor, potential external aggressor. Because we are entitled to carry on the basic spirit of the mutual defense treaty on that one. About this operative reconstruction or this, I think this personally, I think the role of chairman of JCS is advising the president, not in a position to commanding the operation in the field. So I think actually the current form, of course, I shouldn't say that, but anyway, the field commander is responsible for carrying out the operation. So it's quite different system, but the theater, the Korean theater is quite small compared to the theater at the Soviet. I don't know whether it's possible to have the ground component command or the Navy component command. So I think that's a more desirable form, but not in the hand of JCS, because JCS is rather coordinating and advising president for carrying out the missions and the strategic objective, setting down all these things, not actually. If he wants the administrative rights and also the commanding role, I think he will be quite overloaded, or she will be quite overloaded. So, unfortunately, I feel sorry about this current debate going on inside South Korea. It's very inappropriate. There's pros and cons about whether this proposed structure is desirable or not. We have not tested it yet. Nobody knows exactly. But actually, there are other issues we should proceed without having this restructuring operative of the command structures. But actually, everything is tied up with that single issue. There are other 77 tasks to be resolved. But actually, the operative issue is still pending at the National Assembly. I don't think it's possible to resolve the differences between the pros and cons of this. Let me answer this China-Russia things. I think, of course, strategic alliance is not directed toward any specific country. It's more geared toward the attainment of common objectives and values and peace rather than a specific threat. So there's concern, China's concern, Russia's concern, China's reaction to the strengthening of ROK-US alliance. I think once you look at the details of ROK-US alliance as a region for the future, I don't think there's any kind of concern, a serious concern coming from China, because actually this alliance is designed to maintain peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula and to promote also prosperity, not only on the Korean Peninsula but also in the region and the globe, contribute to the attainment of common values which that could be shared by all members of the international community. About whether this alliance can carry out the various missions or not, that actually is the point I made. Right now, we cannot carry out all those other missions. Peninsula, as well as a regional level. Multiple sources, multiple challenges ahead of us. We try to use one force for various purposes. So nowadays, the catchphrase of ROK Armed Forces is a highly efficient multi-purpose, multifunctional forces. Sounds good. I don't know whether it's possible or not, but we have to invest lots of financial resources and time in realizing that kind of force. Even the United States doesn't have that kind of force at this stage of point of time. So, as I said, consistency, a very focused approach, and also the substantial the pouring of financial resources are very necessary in maintaining that. But I elaborate further in my papers about the contingency of multiple possessions quite necessary. Of course, at this stage, I don't think it's possible to carry out all the missions at all. So we should prioritize what kind of missions and what we should go first and come back to the list later. About 2015, so if you go back the year, actually the United States and South Korea agreed to return the wartime operational control between 2007 and 2012. But real agreement, we were not able to agree on the year. The year, I think, was rather determined by political design rather than the real, based on the real assessment of the situation or expectations of the future. If you look at what the Secretary Rumsfeld said before, I think, August 2005 and after 2005, he actually totally different. Before that, he said, oh, ROK Army doesn't have enough capability to carry out this whole mission. And then around after the field commanders meeting, he said, now South Korea has the capability. I also say question to Ambassador Washington. About weeks ago, you raised the kind of course, we'd like to transfer the wartime operation control back to the chairman of JCF of ROK. Unfortunately, ROK at this point of time, maybe sometime in the future, doesn't have the capability to carry out that mission. Actually, 2 weeks later, he changed his position. But actually, so it's politically decided. So I don't know what's the rationale of 2015. But actually, when we first discussed this issue, 2015 is the earliest year we can get, based upon the assumption of 9.85% of annual growth of R&D in defense budget. That is backed up by 6.8% of annual economic growth rate. That assumption is gone. So, I don't know. But anyway, I firmly, we have actually postponed 3 years from 2012 to 2015. But further delay, that actually undermines the basic spring of our lives. So, of course, reality is one thing, but actually the other thing. But we should do our best to keep our promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang Dong. You said you raised the 4 questions. I have 5 anyway, so let me just lump together into a small one. China, with the possible exception of Taiwan issue, is a status quo power, in a sense that it has benefited from and is satisfied with the current international system led by the United States, and it wants to keep it that way for some time to come. The debate over intentions and capabilities is an old one in international relations theory. But intentions are important, but it's very hard to define and could be mutable under certain circumstances. So many realists emphasize capabilities over intentions. Most recently, such realists as Henry Kissinger, John Neil-Scheinel, and also Aaron Friedman also noted it's not the intentions, but objective reality that counts. Take Henry Kissinger, for example. He asked in his newest book on China whether World War I was caused by Germany's rise or German conduct, meaning intentions. His answer is simpler. It doesn't matter. So that it's a present-day rivalry between China and the United States can be deduced from the facts as well. About the anti-access strategy, this is a U.S. coined term. In Korean it's called 반접근. In Taiwan, it's called 반개입. It's a useful and effective concept that trying to connect together the PLA's disparate efforts. So this is one important concept, but I have not addressed this in this paper. But the Chinese Navy has 2 separate objectives. One is anti-access capability, and the other is trying to build a truly regional navy. They are not necessarily separate, but you can take it as an integrated whole as well. For a successful military campaign against Taiwan, PLA needs 4 requirements. They are air control, air superiority, sea control, landing capability, and also missile strikes. It is galling to note that they are acquiring all four capabilities, but they have not yet reached a level that can make a successful campaign level 전력 level warfare. So this is something that we should keep that in mind. And one more thing is that it is true that China has, for example, like the South China Sea dispute, not only used the stakes, but also carrots as well. Most recently, in separate negotiations with Vietnam and the Philippines, China has again used the diplomatic negotiations to resolve the dispute. The question is, for how long? Whether there could be a pattern or is it temporary? That's something question that bears an answer. Thank you.
Okay, before going to
In that case, I'm a researcher at the Korean Institute for National Unification. I have to listen to the chairman or not, I don't know. Okay, my first question goes to Chinese Professor Wang. Recently, the next top leader, Xi Jinping, mentioned that 1950s Korean War was initiated by the South Korea. He mentioned that. If we look at his mention about the Korean situation, then will the Xi Jinping be more hostile to South Korea or friendly towards North Korea? That's a very short question. I would like to see your personal view.
one more thing.
What? Okay. Thank you very much. Another one goes to the meaning. From the Chinese perspective, I think the United States and South Korea's strategic patience became strategic patient. That means even though we try to work out to solve the North Korean nuclear issue, but there's no tangible result actually. So that's why China turned down the United States and engaged in North Korea strategically. This is not a tactics, I think. That means China will acknowledge the North Korea's nuclear status. I think in the long run, that means it is very difficult for us to solve the North Korean nuclear issue through the six-party mechanism. So in that case, I think my assertion is China and North Korea's they said strategic communication. I think real strategic patience prevail over China and North Korea's strategic communication over the 10 years in the future. That's my first question. Second question will be, as in this section, I think at the morning session, I think you characterize, Professor Wang characterized China's diplomacy as assertive, but I think in the 10 years, I think China's diplomacy will be from assertive to aggressive one. So we will witness China's policy behavior will be more aggressive one. That means, what kind of mechanism we, United States and South Korea, to check China's aggressive foreign policy behavior? That's my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Professor Wang Dong.
So sorry about again standing between everyone and dinner.
The first question, Professor Chong's question, whether or not China is also muddling through in terms of its strategy towards North Korea, I think yes, to some extent, certainly it is. I think it is always. I think there's possible contradictions within China's policy strategy toward North Korea. And this is just like in many other countries. Its policy making is always a matter of trying to balance between different incentives, different interests, different ideas, different impulses. So this is not surprising that there will be possible contradictions with inherent contradictions in China's strategy. But I would be arguing that China actually doing more than just modeling through. And indeed, myself, I've been finishing a small piece on arguing that China actually has been following a strategy which we might label it as a peaceful development strategy. But I don't think we will have enough time to talk about that. Maybe we can exchange ideas later on sidelines. But I think also to follow up again, I think China generally analysts agree that there are twin goals toward toward North Korea or Peninsula, Korean Peninsula. One is stability, another is a denuclearization or nuclear-free peninsula. So how China is going to prioritize between these two goals is a question open to debate. Some people believe that actually China would prefer stability, and even at the expense of denuclearization. A lot of criticism actually is being raised in that regard. But I think there's also a very strong argument one can make that there wouldn't be any durable or stability unless there is the denuclearization, at least eventual denuclearization in the peninsula. So I think Chinese leaders understand that. And at least I think a lot of, there are policymakers and scholars who have made that argument. China should pursue that twin goals simultaneously. If that is the case, then I think that the differences between China and the United States and South Korea and other partners will be a matter of approach, not really a matter of principle. And very quickly to the Korean War, I'm not an expert on the Korean War, so I can only talk about based on what I've read. The most recent, I think, there has been some excellent scholarship in terms of Cold War studies in China. There are some fascinating studies done by some great Cold War scholars in China. Some of the studies I have read, which actually suggest that I think among the historians generally, they tend to agree that it is North Korea who first launched attacks. But then again, the question becomes a little bit more complicated if you look at real history, because preceding that, I think there has already been like at least thousands of skirmishes between two sides. And there are also evidence that I think South Korea has also been planning preemptive strikes against North, or at least planning for contingency. So the reality of real history always tends to be a little bit complicated. And also briefly respond to that point that you mentioned. Actually, I'm not making the argument that China has become assertive. I'm just trying to provide a critique about the China turning assertive thesis. Thank you.
Mark, you were asked.
Just real quickly on the China front, sort of China has not been China has also not been very successful on the North Korea policy, just like we in South Korea. So I mean, there have been some moments of influence, but in general, I think you have to say that China's policy towards North Korea, the nuclear issue and other issues, generally not succeeded very well. I think the 2006 nuclear test demonstrated that quite forcefully, and therefore you had the correction from Beijing towards Pyongyang. But anyway, that's getting down a whole other road. As for your question, which will prevail, I think that's, if you want to cut to the essence of a critique of a strategic patience or strategic patient approach, that's it. That's the, for opponents of it, that's the fatal flaw. Is that the approach assumes that there will be enough change in Beijing's approach to North Korea that it will allow more pressure on the regime to it. And I think there's a lot of reasons to be very skeptical about that. No, it cannot prevail without more cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, Japan on the one hand, and China on the other.
Okay, let me conclude this panel and also today's panel. I'll point out the three things. First, I think future security order in North Asia will change in the wake of the rising China into three directions. First, American dominance will continue on until 2020 or 2025, when China is expected to surpass the national power of the United States. After that, we can expect two scenarios. One will be bi-hegemony, sharing of hegemony in this region by the United States and China. And China envisions this, not the first scenario, but China envisions a multipolar world where the constructivist or liberal optimists are expecting to happen. But I think it will depend on under what conditions current green light that China is defensive realism, or China will make a constructive role as an international responsible great power. But at what conditions, at what point will China turn the green light into red light? The researchers and experts should discover and identify the conditions and signposts where this current trend will turn into the less desirable scenario, that by hegemony or the Chinese hegemony after 25. And then what strategy we will do, South Korea or with the United States, to steer the course of our fate of South Korea's security. I think the Japanese scholar pointed out there are three options. One is, what is that? One is, he mentioned integration, the incorporation of China in this regional security order to make them constructive. And the other is deterrence strategy, bilateral alliances, and then strengthening that vis-a-vis China, rising China. And another was balancing diplomacy. But I think until the 2025 kind of incorporation strategy, we have to propagate that kind of strategy. But as a hedging against the worst scenario from happening, we need some kind of engagement and also other kind of strategy, deterrence and balancing strategy, something like that. Having said that, I think for the future Korea-US alliance, I think China used to criticize the Korea-US alliance as an offspring of the Cold War era. But the last debate between Chinese specialists on the floor and Professor Wang shows me that still we have actually the alliance could not come into being if China didn't have North Korea in the Korean War. If China didn't intervene in the Korean War, the alliance, Korea-US alliance, could not happen, right? So this reminds us that how we have to make it through the future while we are strengthening our peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. And also I think the alliance is not fixed one. The alliance itself is changing. The alliance is living entity. It was born and growing and developing and reaching the peak. And maybe in 1 century it will end. Nobody knows. But at least current stage is development stage, growth stage. So as opposed to 20 years of Sino-Korean relationship, this alliance has been almost 60 years. So we have 3 times of life of the alliance. So this alliance recently goes to multi-dimensional, and as we agreed to free trade agreement, adding the economic dimension of the alliance to the security alliance have been maintained for the past 6 decades. And so I think this alliance is kind of a joint problem solving of the challenges that the environment, especially North Korea, is posing to us. So we need to utilize this alliance to the best interest of 2 countries. And also, as alliance is developed, I think alliance is becoming very open-minded. It addresses global peace issue and also regional peace stability too. So also the human security aspect that some scholars pointed out during this session. So I think this openness of alliance will, I think, cooperate with the other regional countries for this purpose. Very open and value-oriented alliance will not be harmful to regional countries. So with this, I'd like to conclude today's long day session, and thank you very much for presenters and the discussants, and also all of you who sit for a long day. Thank you very much.